foreshadowed. But this is going to be a very exciting discussion with members of the Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils, which is a multi-stakeholder group representing leaders from some 40 countries, all of whom are committed to building competitiveness policies and strategies in their own nations. We're very proud that Compete Greece is a member, as is the Delphi Economic Forum. We all know we're living in a great time of turbulence, of transition, transformation, with exponential changes impacting every dimension of human life, society, national security, by the exponential changes in technology and how they're all fused together. Everything from the next generation of the information revolutions, from the merger with biotech, materials, nanotechnology, cognitive technologies, the list goes on. But all of these technologies, of course, hold the promise to solve many of the great problems, and we heard about some of those in the previous discussion. So we have a great group of colleagues and leaders that are going to address these things, and let me introduce them quickly, and we'll turn to our discussion. First is Hippolyte Fofack, where you're right next to me, great, who's the chief economist of the Afreximbank based in Cairo. He's a former leader at the World Bank and has a tremendous background in the economic issues as well as science and technology. He's the board member of the African Academy of Sciences, and we're very proud that you came and joined us from Cairo. Thank you. And to my left, it'd be hard to introduce this gentleman, Dr. Ray O. Johnson, because we've been friends and colleagues for many years. Ray is currently the CEO of a new exciting institute, really more than an institute, the Technology Innovation Institute, which is part of Abu Dhabi's Advanced Technology Research Council. But just as we heard before in the GALP, the talent recruitment and what they're doing, Ray sort of is an epitome of that because he was the chief technology officer of Lockheed Martin, the U.S. Council on Competitiveness. We worked together many years. He's a leader in Bessemer Ventures, and really, if anybody we're going to talk about what wants to know about quantum computing, quantum platforms, Ray was one of the first people in the world to invest and understand all of this. So, Ray, thank you very, very much, and we're very proud that you're a member of the Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils.
Happy to be here.
To my left of Hippolyte is Antigone Papanikolaou, who's the Director of Legal and Corporate Affairs for Microsoft Greece, Cyprus, and Malta. And you specialize in all the issues that Microsoft takes a leadership role in. And you've had a great career in the private sector with Coca-Cola, Philip Morris, and others. And we're looking forward to your comments and thoughts on how the next generation of capabilities are impacting life and solving problems. Giorgio Papadimitriou is the Chief Operating Officer of Renewables and New Businesses at Portugal's main energy company, GALP Energia. He is a native of Greece but lives in Portugal, had been the CEO of NL Green Power in the United States and Europe. He's really one of the leading businessmen, women at the forefront of the clean energy transformation. And I'm very proud, being the Vice Chairman of the Trustees of the American College of Greece, that you're a graduate of DIRI. And thank you for coming as well. And then let me introduce to the far left my colleague, Chad Evans, who's the Executive Vice President of the U.S. Council on Competitiveness. He leads our innovation initiatives. He has a long, distinguished career in competitiveness policy, economics, a graduate of Georgetown, and plays a tremendous role in bringing together the CEOs, the university presidents, the labor leaders, and national lab directors of the United States that are building a new technology, innovation-driven future. So let me start with you, Ray. You, as I've introduced, probably of everybody here, given your role at Lockheed Martin and Bessemer and now the new institute, kind of have the broadest sweep of understanding of the technology frontiers and potentials and how they are now being applied for these grand global challenges that nations in the world are facing. So share with us your perspective on that, and not the whole universe, because we'll come back for a second round, but a little bit of this, because your institute's a new model. which is also very exciting. You're a new model itself, an innovation model.
Okay, well, thank you, Deborah. I'll make some broad general comments, then we can get into more details. The broad comments are that, first of all, there is invention and there's innovation. And I think a lot of people confuse the two. Invention is the creation of the idea, and innovation is the application of the idea to products and services. And I think it's important to look at what the goals are. Are your goals to... I had a conversation with a Nobel laureate a few months ago, and he made a bold statement. He said, all, not part, not most, all discoveries, all the things that we know today, all of the technology, everything we have came from basic research. Well, I don't know that I mean, you might be able to tie it to some basic research. I don't necessarily believe that, but basic research is important. However, not every country can afford to make the kinds of investments in basic research that are necessary to get the outcomes. But every country in the world can use the outcomes of that basic research as they innovate those inventions to create solutions. And I think that's important. So I think deciding whether to focus on invention or innovation and what your outcomes, what timeline for your outcomes and what outcomes you desire are important. The second thing I'll mention is the very powerful triad of government, industry, and academia working together. Because each of those entities has such an important component in getting the outcomes that we all want. Academia has, of course, the basic research component, the creative spirit, all those things. Industry has the role of transitioning. They're the commercialization partner, if you will, in the innovation process. So industry plays an important role, and government plays an important role as well. Look at the UN SDGs and look at the difficulty factor that is associated with most of those SDGs. Government plays an important role in investing in high-risk, high-payoff things. So those are just some of the, broad general comments that I would make about countries that are interested or businesses that are interested in creating innovative outcomes. I'll just give a couple of comments about TII, Technology Innovation Institute, in Abu Dhabi, part of the Advanced Technology Research Council. We have currently 815 or so researchers there from 74 nations. The gentleman who spoke before us talked about the Gulf region attracting talent. That's absolutely true. Abu Dhabi is a center for talent now. It's a center for AI development. We have of our 10 centers, we have a center focused on AI. We're doing things. We've created Noor, which is a Arab translation chat capability that came out a few months ago. So it is, in fact, a center of innovation, I would say, not invention. It's not a place that you go for basic research, but it is a place that you go for innovation and solutions. So thank you. Thank you.
Antigone, I gave a little allusion to, the role of the next generation of IT, and we're hearing about it, throughout this conference. But, your role at Microsoft, which is very broad and strategic in this region, you're seeing the great potential for the application in everything from precision agriculture and transportation to sustainable cities, etc. So share with us what you see as the real opportunities for addressing global challenges and opportunities.
First of all, thank you. It's really an honor to be sitting with you, and thank you, the organizers. So let me start by saying that 2023, I think, is an inflection point regarding technology, and especially AI. And saying that, as Internet and smartphones, I think that AI will reshape the professional and personal lives and will help humans to advance critical thinking, stimulate creativeness, and be more productive. In the meantime, also, there will be breakthroughs that these technologies can help regarding the research, healthcare, treatment, combat the climate change, and also help a lot the sustainability. And at this point, I think also that artificial intelligence and the use of the advancements we are seeing already are being placed. And we can draw some conclusions from the implementation of AI already in the globe. And let me Let me use an example. We've heard before on the gentleman who said such invaluable insights of what is coming. Also, the UN predicted that by 2015, the global population will be 9.7 millions. This poses an urgent question to the farmers, how they can sustainably feed such growing population. And maybe the answer can be found already in a farm which is close by to Washington, D.C. And why I'm saying that? Because currently there is a project done between Microsoft and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which gives the opportunity to the farmers to extract data and cultivate and farm more sustainably the crops in a way that will increase yields and will be more resilient to climate changes. I'm referring to FarmBits, which is a project that harness data and artificial intelligence to the farmers to be able to see the conditions of the farm on the real life time, but use also technologies like TV white space, because we do know that in farms there is usually no internet connection or little so far. And of course there is also the problem of urbanization, because again, based on the UN, the 50% of the population, the global population currently lives in urban areas, and that expects to climb up to 68% by 2050. And that creates also a huge challenge to the governments and the leaders of this globe to address this speedy urbanization by creating smart cities which will be innovative, which will be inclusive, which will be sustainable. And the leaders do really need to lean in to data intelligence and use technologies like AI and IoT to create smart cities that will give that format. And I mean, also being mindful of the time, let me also share something that there are some other challenges regarding our own culture, the global culture. There are threats because of national disasters, climate change, wars, that our cultural heritage might be threatened. And let me give you an example, a real example coming from this country, how we can preserve our global culture, and which is very close to my heart. I'm talking about the ancient Olympia Common Grounds project, which is the result of a partnership with the Greek Ministry of Culture and Microsoft. And by bringing together archaeologists along with engineers and using this power that technology gives us today, we were able to digitally recreate how ancient Olympia looked like 2,000 years ago for us, and also for the next generation to see how this place looked like while our ancestors were living. So concluding, I think that these days AI, and I'm very optimistic about that, and the advances in technologies equip humanity to be better positioned to address the challenges, not only the current, but the future. In a way, we have a co-pilot, as we say in Microsoft, to help us address these challenges.
Thank you very much. And I just had to quick add that a little bragging, because the former chairman of the U.S. Council on Competitiveness for almost 10 years was the CEO and chairman of John Deere. There are many John Deere tractors and things in Greece and all over the world. But they were using AI and autonomy with their tractors over 15 years ago, before no one even talked about AI. And their precision agriculture is incredible for the productivity. So to bring all of that throughout the world is great. And that makes me want to turn to you, Hippolyte. You're coming from the Afreximbank as chief economist, but very much aware of what the business opportunities, the exports are, the transformation of Africa. Many believe Africa is the continent, of this century coming forward. So how do you see all of these converging disruptive technologies impacting the alleviation of poverty, better standard of living, dealing with the tremendous crises around food, energy, and water? What is your perspective as a chief economist of a major Pan-Africa bank?
Well, thank you very much, Deborah. I think for associating the African Export-Import Bank to this.
Now it's off right there.
To this very important conversations. And let me just give you one example to illustrate, going back to the point of the distinction between innovations and inventions. I think last 2 weeks ago, we were in Washington for the World Bank IMF spring meetings. I was in a panel with the central bank governor of Kenya. He essentially said, when I am in DC, I am worried because I need cash. Because in Kenya, we've been used to become a cashless society. Essentially, the mobile money has become the way of life in Kenya. They were not at the invention side, but it's become the most innovative in terms of use of those technology. I think that's what we're talking about, that distinction between innovation and inventions. And Africa has essentially been the place which is actually leveraging what has been done to increase efficiency, productivity, reduce frictions, but also time and productivity. We see that a lot in the financial space. We see that also increasingly in the agriculture, in the medical field, the drug distributions. We've seen delivering drugs in Rwanda, which is almost like Delphi in terms of mountains, but without infrastructure. They're using drones to deliver drugs in remote areas. And the mobile payment actually increased financial inclusion within the continent. It's a continent whereby years ago, very lucky we had 10% population having access to banking and financial institutions. In Kenya today, it's really exceeded 50-60% as innovations. But more importantly, I think what has happened is that over the years, technology, unfortunately, has been used as the dividing line between developed and developing countries. And that has persisted. In other words, used as a rent-seeking tool. And we can actually therefore say that unless you close that technology gap, you'll have that poverty gap, making it difficult to achieve the World Bank overarching objective of alleviating the poverty we talked about. So we have to move into a new area where technology diffusion will become the tool to accelerate that global convergence. And I've often said that what we've seen in Asia the last 20-30 years actually started as educations, access to technology, and creations. And one typical example is the contrast between, let's say, Japan and the rest of the world in the automotive space. They were very quick to realize that the future of automotive was in electronics. And they invested a lot in electronics. And before we knew it, the automotive industry shifted toward Asia. I think we are very confident that investing heavily in science and technology will become key to narrowing that welfare and income gap between Africa and the rest of the world, and essentially pushing toward convergence. And that divergence, the use of technology as a tool for rent-seeking, for inequality, was actually very much what we also see in the space of climate change and so forth. And if you take one specific example, the technology that actually led to the combustion engine created inequality in access to energy. It's often said that most African countries produce less energy than Spain, for instance. And you can see that the technology gap leads to inequality in access to energy, and that therefore drives the productivity gap, the production gap that we see between Africa and the rest of the world. So we at the bank are essentially investing a lot in closing those gaps in terms of infrastructure. But another important area of innovations, which has actually been very important to us, is in the trade space. And if we go back to the issue of competitiveness, it's quite clear to us, looking at the data, that the countries which have actually successfully integrated the global economies are those which have been in the manufacturing space. And when you look at Africa, for instance, and back in the 70s, its share of African global trade was about 5-6%. It's fallen to 2.7%, less than Holland, the whole continent. In part because when you look at the compositions of trade, it's been increasingly manufactured with increasing technological content. We see that a lot. And we are also essentially, therefore, investing into what we call special economic zone industrial park to accelerate the diversifications, but also bringing within the continent major corporations to actually increase that essentially development of regional value chains which facilitate technology transfer. And finally, I think a very important point that I also like to mention in the financing space, it's digitalizations. And we've often wondered how come to trade between Nigeria and Ghana, two neighboring countries, we will need the dollars that we do not have, essentially, because the key constraint to growth in Africa is liquidity constraint. You don't have access to hard currency. So digitalization has enabled the bank to develop and launch what we call the Pan-African Payment Settlement Systems, PAPS, which enable us to settle intra-African trade in local currencies, therefore reducing that frictions and liquidity constraints. And our estimate shows that over time, we'll be able to actually save out to $5 billion a year in transaction costs. I think we launched the system last year, and its prospects in terms of impact are significant. But we believe that that's just the first step. But more importantly, it's very important to create the conditions for manufacturing expansion across the continent to achieve global convergence.
Thank you. And I'm very happy you raised the issue of the linkage between manufacturing capability, digitalization, and innovation. Some of my colleagues have heard me say this over many years now. Manufacturing is not dirty, dumb, dangerous, and disappearing. It's smart, it's safe, it's sustainable, and surging. And bringing them together is really part of the technological future. So we're going to come back to that. But I want to turn to energy and sustainability and addressing climate issues. And Giorgio, you really are not only our expert in this field in the technology, but you're putting it into practice through the businesses that you are leading, and particularly in the renewable space. So what is your view about the transition? How fast? What are some of the portfolio issues? Take us into the future energy world.
Thank you for that opportunity. So yeah, transition, first of all, is inevitable. It's happening, and there's no doubt about it. It's about the no if. It's only about the when, right? So it should be clear why. Only because it makes sense from an environmental perspective. Let's face it, because it also makes sense from an economic perspective. So transition is happening. It's about the when as opposed to the if. Then, what about technology? What is the technological angle that we bring into this transition? So, how are we going to achieve it? And I will agree with both Ray and Hippolyte. Is not about reinventing the wheel. It's not about creating something new. It's about innovation. It's about using what we know in order to actually put it in practice and make this energy space, energy world that we live in, that has been developing in the last 100 years in a certain way, to actually flip it around. And what I mean by that, obviously we've developed a system that the energy comes to you, right? Somehow the energy comes to you. That's how we all grew up. That's how it's been. That's how it's been conceived. So you go from big power plants, big oil fields, big, cascading down with infrastructure to each and every one of us. Now we have the opportunity to actually turn this around. We have the opportunity. So I think innovation has, right now, with what we know, what we can already, we don't have to create something new. We can actually flip this around and give the opportunity to each and every one of us to participate in the mix. How can we do that? We've developed solar panels. We've developed battery storage systems. We have a grid. We can actually get, in the developing world, we can actually get each and every one of us with digitalization and with the technology that we already have. We can get each and every one of us to be a producer, right? And not only that, we can actually be a conscious consumer as well. So right now, I grew up, and perhaps many of us grew up in a way that we didn't realize the time value of energy. And it was something that we took for granted. And it just takes a behavioral switch which is enabled now by technology because we have all these digital appliances, digital gadgets that know everything about us, and they certainly can know how we consume energy, and they certainly can know what's the value of the energy out there while we do that. And they can actually tell us, you know what, you should actually, instead of consuming now, you can consume later, and you can actually get paid for that. So that gives an enormous power to people in the developed world, let me put it that way, to actually use technology and bring the transition forward. The same concept can apply also in the developing worlds, right? To leapfrog to electricity directly. And we're talking about, I think Hippolyte mentioned about mobile payments. That's a revolution, but still it's not a great, I mean, it's a revolution, but it's not anything super new. In the end, imagine, you know, remote areas that have their own panels, and then the problem was, okay, how are the people going to pay for this? Then you have the opportunity to actually make mobile payments, and that's actually something that's growing in Africa a lot. And going back to energy as, let's say, the big energy industry as we know it, innovation can have to do with hydrogen. We have all this abundant electricity, right? And we have this concept of power to X. So there's going to be all this electricity, what to do with it? And, you know, green electricity, we don't, you know, we need to find storage, obviously. And that's something that we're working on. But then when you have all this electricity, you can actually use it and do what? Something that you know for 100 years, to electrolyze the water and get hydrogen. And why is that important? Because you cannot electrify everything. We're trying to electrify everything, and I think that's great. We're going to stumble in certain constraints, right? There are heavy applications, there's aviation that we really cannot do much about, at least not in the foreseeable future. So we can actually, we're using hydrogen today. In all refineries, we have one, the single one in Portugal. In all refineries, there's hydrogen production. How? You get natural gas, and then you dump steam, and you reform that into hydrogen. And, of course, CO2, a lot of CO2. Right? So we have all this, and this alone requires enormous amount of green electricity to turn that from gray to green. That can make you start from decarbonizing the existing infrastructure, and then it gives you the necessary know-how to be able to use hydrogen and develop also transportation methods for hydrogen, to use it also in other industrial applications. I think with what we know already, just by being bold, we can actually turn the energy system upside down. And I think this is what the world is working on. I'm a firm believer that the world is working towards the right direction in a constant disequilibrium, so, you know, wasting resources in the way, but moving, you know, moving to the right direction. I think that's where we're going.
Great, thank you.
Very excited.
You know, I'm concerned about our time, and I want to turn to Chad Evans, because our panelists have all mentioned partnerships, public-private partnerships, the role of government investments, bringing in the private sector, universities, national labs, and you've put together and lead many complex partnerships in the frontiers of technology. So if you comment on that and how that's really accelerating in the United States, across the nation.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. I think as I've been listening to the panel, the word that comes to my mind through the lens of the United States is experimentation. So over the past 12 to 15 years, there has been a tremendous ferment in the U.S. to really transform its innovation system. There has been a great history, of course, in the U.S. in this space. Deborah, you led many transformations around, for example, the commercialization of university-based research. That was transformational in the country. I think we had a period of 10 or 15 years where we were in a pretty steady state. But I think we're beginning to wake up over the past decade that there are a new set of challenges and transformations that require scale, that require the collaboration of the public and the private. For example, we led with the Obama administration the development of a whole range of public-private partnerships, new national manufacturing innovation institutes to address, one, yes, the development and the deployment of clean energy technologies, But also, to flip that, how would we actually deploy those technologies to increase the energy efficiency and productivity of manufacturing writ large? Successful, but not enough. And so the Council endeavored over the past 3 years to launch a new national commission on innovation and competitiveness frontiers with a goal to transform America's innovation agenda, driven by the private sector, but engaging the public sector hand in hand. Our first major report, Competing in the Next Economy, issued over 50 strategic recommendations, all of which were geared towards increasing tenfold the number of innovators in the United States, the number of innovations deployed in the United States, and the speed by which those innovations would be deployed. I mention this because that report has been foundational in what I would say is probably the most important piece of bipartisan legislation over the past decade, the CHIPS and Science Act. And I mention this because it's going to tie back to the point that Ray made at the very beginning of this panel. CHIPS and Science Act is transformational and at the same time potentially not transformational. Transformational, yes, it will fund and help deploy and develop new advanced microelectronics in the United States, hopefully releasing us from a stranglehold by a shadow that's lurking. We haven't talked about China, but it's very real, the competitiveness threat, competitiveness challenge. But the other side of the CHIPS and Science Act is science. There is a proposed massive investment in our science, basic science infrastructure in the United States. But unlike the CHIPS side, it is not funded. And in fact, there's been a lot of excitement over the past 3 to 4 years that we would be quadrupling the National Science Foundation budget. Okay, there was $16 billion proposed in the CHIPS and Science Act. The President's own budget for fiscal year 2024 reduced that to $12 billion. Okay, that's a blow, but still above where NSF had been before. But just this week, the new debt limit negotiations are calling for an $8 billion increase in the National Science Foundation. That basically obviates 3 to 4 years of massive private sector exhortation that if we're really facing a Sputnik moment in the United States, we're sputtering. We're not responding. We're not accelerating. We're not increasing tenfold. So what are we going to do? And I mention it because of Ray's point at the beginning about basic research. Basic research is fungible. It is globally dispersed. But someone has to do it. And if the United States isn't performing that basic research, and yes, we hope we're innovating in the United States, but sharing that with our strategic partners, who is going to be doing that? Are we all going to be dependent upon China, the basic research to drive our innovations going forward? That's a major focus of the U.S. Council as we launch our second phase of work this year and next year leading up to the presidential elections about, yes, transforming the U.S. innovation agenda, but thinking about the global implications.
Thank you, Chad. We have just a few minutes left, so we'll start with you, Giorgio. I would like each of you, you have your crystal balls, but you also are practitioners of developing and using technology to address these big global challenges. What would be something inspirational that you would like to share very, very fast? So it's kind of a lightning rod. We'll start with you.
Power to democratize energy production.
Democratize
electricity production. Make it something that comes from the people. They're owners of their own destiny. And I can tell you that's something that, big companies like us have understood, that it's important to actually be there. Because if you're not there, then perhaps, the reality will render you obsolete in a few decades. So I think that's something that technology is now available to make people have their own destiny, have their destiny in their hands when it comes to energy.
Yeah. Thank you. Antigone.
I would say that regarding the ones who are making powerful technologies, they need to ensure also that these technologies will be used responsibly. And this is also the goal that Microsoft applies when it develops and deploys artificial intelligence in order to earn the trust of the people who are going to use it. It's a human amplifier. We have a co-pilot together, and also that, because previously it was mentioned about the smart legislation. We need to be also to work towards having a more sustainable, if I may say, legislation, which is going to be risk-based, it's going to be outcome oriented, and then it's going to be adjustable and adaptable to international norms. That's why we can keep the frameworks of artificial intelligence models more effective and more to empower people to use the potentials of AI.
Thank you. Hippolyte.
No, thank you very much. I think one thing that we did not discuss are human capital dimensions of it. I think behind any technology and innovation you have the human resources. And back in the 19th century, 1861, the great British writer Samuel Smiles wrote a wonderful book, The Life of Engineers, where he described how British engineers allow Britain to close the infrastructure gap with continental Europe, and praise those engineers for their contribution to UK's development. I think that convergence that scientists and engineers did provide in Europe, in the UK, in the 19th century, is what we now need at global level. I think we should prepare the engineers of tomorrow, the sons of tomorrow, to work on issues that will set the world on the path of global convergence.
Thank you. Because without engineers, we cannot apply the science and knowledge to solve any problems. Thank you. Ray.
First, thank you for inviting me to be on the panel. It's wonderful to be back in Greece. This is the home of democracy. And I heard the term democratization. We now have democratization. And I'm going to, I guess, issue a warning. And the warning is individual responsibility. Because we already see large media entities around the world using the democratization and the fact that everyone has access to information, possibly in nefarious ways to, for example, sway elections and things like that. And I think as AI becomes more dominant, it's an individual responsibility to try to figure out what's real and what's not. Are you being manipulated or not? What is the source of the information? Because people have become so complacent and just kind of going with the flow and believing things. And AI is going to make it much, much, much more interesting. And it can be used in ways that will be very detrimental to the democratization and to democracy itself.
Thank you. And I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to talk about quantum platforms.
It's okay. We needed a 2-hour panel. It's okay.
Chad.
I think my final point, Deborah, would be riffing on the theme of democratization. Innovation takes place in a place. And there's a lot of context around national innovation strategies, global innovation strategies. Well, there needs to be a new look at place-based innovation. We're doing it in the United States. Yes, we need to expand the demography of who is involved in our innovation ecosystem, but we need to be harnessing technologies, all of which we've heard here, to also think about the geography of that innovation. More places can play in this innovation space, and we need to optimize for that.
So, people, places, partnerships, and tomorrow morning, I urge all of you to come to the great session the GFCC is hosting on skills and the future of workforce. Venetia Kousia from Greek Compete. Dr. Isabel Gill, the rector of Catholic University, and Roberto Alvarez and others will be on that. So thank you all for being with us, and look forward to a wonderful remaining time at the Delphi Economic Forum. Thank you.